Well, I think that it's now 11 o'clock. What I'd like to do is get started with our program. Hopefully we can get done with our direct presentation maybe in about 45 or 50 minutes. That will leave enough time for questions from the audience, which I think people really enjoy, and it's actually my favorite part of the program. My name's Gary Grouch. I'm Executive Director of the Alliance for Affordable Energy. The Alliance for Affordable Energy is a nonprofit organization established about 10 years ago. Our job is to slow down the electric meters in the state of Louisiana. That's what our job is, plain and simple. One of the byproducts of that, which we value very highly, is by slowing down the electric meters, we can also help to save the planet, save the environment. I have some distinguished panel here today, and I'm going to introduce them to you. Not as formally as some people may like, but as I see it, because they're really a very special group of people. First one here is Dr. Paul Templet. Paul is now with the Institute of Environmental Studies at LSU in Baton Rouge. When I first met Paul, the good thing about him was that I didn't have to speak in ways so that he could understand. He told me right off, he's an energy guy. He's a physicist by training. He loves energy. He knows what a quad is. That is 10 to the 15th BTU. I mean, this guy has, his career has been in energy. He was the head of the Department of Environmental Quality under Buddy Roemer. That was in Buddy's other personality, not the one he ran for this time. But one of the best things Buddy ever did was to put Paul Templet in charge of the DEQ. Paul has, I would say, anybody in the state, Paul has probably pushed the ball up the hill of environmental protection further than any single individual. And I'm sure from time to time he felt like he was all by himself. And I think that was a problem that we as environmentalists kind of let him do that pushing. And now that the ball is up there, it still has not started to come back down, and we need to make sure that it not only stays at where Paul Templet left it, but goes higher and higher. Tom Lowenburg. Tom is the research director of the Alliance for Affordable Energy. He's one of the founders of the Alliance, along with myself. I'm sure he suffers with the same kind of founders syndrome as I do. But he came from an English and a kind of a literature background at Grinnell University. And of course, as with the United States Army, knowing he'd never touched a computer before, I put him in charge of all our computers. And he has really done an amazing job in not only becoming a master at computers, but Tom is one of the best writers and editors, which is something you very seldom see in one person that I've ever been privileged to work with. And he is he knows more about energy efficiency and least cost planning than probably anybody in the state, including the consultants that now work for the city of New Orleans. We have Tommy Milliner, my far left. Tommy is graduating from Tulane Law School with honors, and he loves public interest work. He loves public work too. He's one of the leading experts on franchise law in the state of Louisiana, the Open Meetings Law, Public Records Act. He did this for the city of New Orleans very successfully with a small group of people in the city attorney's office in about the 1984-1985 time frame. They won a number of pieces of litigation, and like in many government projects, the more successful they got, of course, they decided that they were going to get rid of Tommy and the group of people that he had worked with under Sal Anselmo, and hire people at 10 times the price and about half the talent, 1/10 of the heart of Tommy Milliner. So he now works, he is the Energy Law Fellow at the Tulane Environmental Law Clinic, and which is our partner, meaning the partner of the Alliance for Affordable Energy in our renewable and energy efficiency project with our other partner, which is Pace University out of New York. So we are working on a national level, and Tommy's doing an excellent job in handling all of the litigation that goes on in front of the City Council and the Public Service Commission in Baton Rouge. What we're talking about today is, the topic of this program is global warming, least cost planning, and Louisiana. People have to understand that what is happening now is a problem that we may not even want to face. I've heard it said that if there was ever a problem that humans would have to overcome, and that human institutions are not capable of overcoming, it's probably global warming. And when I say global warming, it goes under a number of different names, so that when you see these names in the newspapers or in magazines, you can call it global warming, you can call it global climate change, you can call it, it also gets called sea level rise at times. All of these is basically the same phenomena. And this phenomena it's a simple phenomena that anyone who's taken organic or inorganic chemistry understands, and that is that if you have a closed container and of oxygen and a certain level of carbon dioxide, and you keep heat on it, you put more carbon dioxide into that closed container, you're going to get a hotter environment. And that's what's happening now with burning of fossil fuels in our atmosphere. That is, with increasing the parts per million of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Over the last century, it's increased 30, 40, 50%. You have sunlight that comes in on a relatively constant basis. The sunlight can't get out because you have more carbon dioxide in your atmosphere, and there is a warming that occurs. Now, the idea of global climate change started out about 1985, 86, from some NASA scientists. They began to develop computer models to try to predict what the effect of increasing carbon dioxide would be in the atmosphere. Around 1988, some findings started to come out, preliminary findings at the time. Received a lot of news comments, and the mathematical models at that point were found to not really accurately predict what was going to happen. They tended to overstate the effect. And from 1988 to 1992, there was the concept of global climate change went into kind of a scientific limbo. Now, the United Nations developed a group called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to look at it, to look at the conflicting models, to look at the statements that are being made, and to try to find out what the truth is. Now, in 1992, there was a conference in Rio de Janeiro. 1992 was probably the height of the environmental movement. Al Gore and others played a part in bringing together people in Rio to try to set a minimum level, even in the face of scientific uncertainty, of goals that countries could reach in bringing down the burning of fossil fuels, primarily oil and coal, and to a certain extent natural gas, but we'll talk about that a little later. From 1992 to 1996, this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been working at perfecting its models. At the same time, they've been making direct observations of the planet and have found recently, on October the 24th, 1995, they released their findings. And what they have found is that the mathematical models that were used early on to predict global climate change overstated the case by about 20%. Primarily the reason for that, according to the scientists, was because the regional effects of sulfides in the atmosphere was masking the total effect of putting more and more carbon dioxide. The heating effect of putting more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere was being masked by sulfides that were being distributed largely on a regional basis, coming also coming from power plants and from other kinds of emitting industries. Now that that is taken into account, however, they have now been able to accurately predict, they believe, what will be the effect of global climate change over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And their findings are this: that sea levels could rise up to 36 inches, a median level of 16 inches by 2100, mostly because of melting glaciers and the expansion of water as it warms up. That could submerge vast areas of low-lying coastal land, including major river deltas, parts of China, and many island nations. The most vulnerable areas, such as major river deltas and some beaches, would be largely inundated in 25 to 50 years. More than 100 million people will be displaced from coastal areas by rising sea levels. Deadly summer heat, such as that which killed 500 people in Chicago this year, could get more frequent and more severe. Areas that are already prone to flooding, such as southern Louisiana, would flood more often. And larger groups of people would suffer from increased incidences of infectious diseases like malaria, yellow fever, dengue fever, and viral encephalitis. The New York Times published a front-page article on September the 18th. The headlines were "Scientists Say Earth's Warming Could Set Off Worldwide Disruption," which included a map of the world's delta areas under the title "Deltas in Distress." Above the map it states, if the effects of global warming raise sea levels an average of 1.5 feet around the world, as some scientists predict, parts of many populated deltas would become uninhabitable. The only delta region in the United States included in the New York Times map is the Mississippi Delta. 50 to 60% of Louisiana's population, around 2 million people, lives within 50 miles of the Gulf of Mexico. According to an Environmental Protection Agency report entitled "Greenhouse Effect, Sea Level Rise in Coastal Wetlands," quote, "The coastal wetlands of Louisiana appear to be most vulnerable to a rise in sea level. The coastal wetlands of the Mississippi River Delta are already converting to open water at a rate of 50 square miles per year because of the interaction between human activities such as construction of levees and navigation channels and current relative sea level trends caused by land subsidence. Future sea level rise could substantially accelerate the rate of wetlands loss and alter the relative advantages of various options to solve the problem." So, we are now at a point where we have a scientific consensus. In fact, according to the Chemical and Engineering News, which is a very conservative engineering magazine, they say that global climate change is now at the same level of scientific uncertainty as the destruction of the ozone layer. The problem we have as a culture is that the destruction of the ozone layer was created by chlorofluorocarbons that are manufactured by about 12 companies. Carbon dioxide emissions, the burning of fossil fuels, on the other hand, is the underpinning of the 20th century. So what we're talking about here is an activity that largely goes directly after the foundations of our 20th century economy: automobiles, industrial expansion, and growth. Now, our job is to find ways in which we can mitigate that. We could continue to build our economies. We can have sustainable economies. and we can all find out how the future is going to look. We are now at the crossroads of that. And it is the decisions that we make today and the next 5 years that will militate what's going to happen for our children and our grandchildren. We believe that it's time to swing for the fences. We've got a lot of work, and we don't have much time. Another EPA study that just came out on the probability of sea level rise says this: if greenhouse gases can be stabilized by 2025, that is 25 years after the turn of the century, half of the projected sea level rise could be avoided. If we wait for 2050 to stabilize gas emissions, only 28% of the sea level rise could be avoided. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how quickly can we do this? And what are the cultural and political stumbling blocks in our way? Because I can tell you that the technical fix is difficult, but it is not that difficult. I think that the technical fix can be done. The real problem is going to be cultural, is going to be political on how this can be done. And that's where all of us have a stake in overcoming those problems. One of the major problems we have here is the question of balancing. Every time I turn on the television or listen to the radio, politicians are always talking about balancing protection of the environment against the economy. That is a paradigm that must change. It is a false paradigm. And our first job will be to challenge that every time we hear someone talk about that. And one of the major themes I think that you'll hear today from Dr. Templet is why that is untrue and why that is going to stop us from making the changes as quickly as we can. So what I'd like to do is to have Paul start his presentation, and I'll come back to you at the end and we'll talk a little bit about how this is going to work in Louisiana.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning. Nice to be here. I want to thank Gary for that nice introduction as he was of me. As he was giving it, I thought to myself, God, that guy can't focus. But there is a thread that runs through economy, environment, and that thread is energy, and that's why I'm interested in it. So if you're interested in environment, you've got to be interested in energy. Today, my task is to tell you where Louisiana fits in this global climate thing, and we play a substantial role. I think you'll be surprised just how big a role we play. And also to show you some environmental things and some economic things, all of which are going to get better if we become more efficient in the way we use energy. If we use energy wiser, we won't lose money. We're going to make money. And I'll show you how and what the connections are. Now, I like to rely on graphs and charts. I'm a techie type. But I think you'll understand where I'm going with this, and I'll try to explain these charts as we go. Let's get to them. Over here. There we go. All right, here's a chart, bar chart. The size of that bar tells you how much CO2 is being emitted by various entities. The U.S. is down there, number one, so we're big. The U.S. is big. It's about a quarter of all the CO2 emitted in the world is by the U.S. Russia was second. Now, this is an 88 slide, so that may have changed. Russia's kind of been dismembered since then. Japan is there, and so you would expect is fourth in that list. You would expect the big industrial countries to be way up there, and they are. Now, if you were to take the U.S. states and break them apart and treat them as a country, Texas would be next. Well, Texas would be seventh. So as a country, Texas is seventh in the world. As a country, Louisiana is 26th, pretty big, 26th in the world. In other words, we emit almost as much CO2 as the entire countries of Brazil and South Korea. South Korea is very industrialized. It's one of those Asian tigers they talk about. So we're way up there. We're one of the big players. And you see here across the bottom, It's slightly less than emissions in Brazil or South Korea. We rank 6th in the world in emissions per capita. And the per capita thing helps because that helps to normalize for size of the state. In other words, Texas is 4 times our size in both area and population, and that's why they're ahead of us here. I have other slides which will help show some of this data in a way that might make more sense to you. The reason we're so high in Louisiana and Texas and the U.S. in general is that our economy is built on inefficient use of materials and energy. To a physicist, and that's why the training that I have, there's only 3 things in the universe. There's energy, there's materials or matter, and there's information. So just 3 things. Everything's made up of those. So we're going to look at this inefficient use. All right, here's the 50 states. This is total industrial energy consumption. The number of sectors in each state. You got residential, you got industrial, you got commercial, you got transportation, and then maybe in agriculture. That's how the data is compiled, so you've got to use it that way. The reason I'm showing you industrial is because that's where the energy is used. And especially in the big states like Texas and Louisiana, we don't use very much relative to our industry. The citizens don't use very much. It's not that you and I as people are using a lot of energy, although we do use a fair amount. It's nowhere near what the industries are using. So if you break it down by state, then Texas is first, which you would expect. Louisiana's second. California's third. California and Texas are both much larger than we are in terms of their industry, in terms of their population. So Louisiana's looking a little weird, sticking out there with these big states. Here's energy consumption per capita by state. And again, we're pretty high. Louisiana's third in this case. Only behind Alaska and Wyoming. Remember, you're dividing by population now, so you got states with small populations, but a lot of energy use, like Wyoming and Alaska, then they're going to show up high in this kind of analysis. So we're third, or actually we're tied for second. This is an important slide. What we're looking at here is called the energy intensity. This is the amount of energy it takes to make $1 of GNP, or gross state product, GSP, is what you use for states. And Louisiana's way over on the right. We're at 46,000. The units here are BTUs per dollar of GSP. That means we're not very efficient. In fact, we're the least efficient state. And the startling part is that we stick it up 30% above the next nearest state, which is Wyoming, and then West Virginia, and Texas is down there somewhere. So that's 50% actually. We're 50% higher than Texas, which means we're not very efficient. We're less efficient. Down here on the left side, you find the states that actually are doing better, and that's New York, Connecticut, and a number of others, Massachusetts, California. They make $1 of GNP with 1/5 the amount of energy that it takes us in Louisiana to make $1 of GNP or GSP. So this is important. Who cares that we use all this energy and we don't use it very efficiently? Well, we should care, and I'll show you why in a minute. One, if you use a lot of energy, you're going to create a lot of pollution. It's not surprising then that we're #1 in the TRI emissions data every year that comes out. We have more hazardous waste per capita than any other state, and all those environmental numbers we know about. A strong relationship then, and I'll show you that in a minute. It's also an interesting relationship between the economic health and the energy intensity. Now this is a busy slide, so don't let it scare you. I'm just going to deal with the big categories over here, and just let you know this is a statistical analysis. And there's a bunch of factors up there: environmental factors, energy factors, socioeconomic, economic development, competitiveness, all the things economists worry about. And what I'm comparing them to is the energy intensity, that number I showed you before, where we were very high. Now, that column that says Pearson R is the only one we're going to look at. The others are for people who like statistics. But all of these meet the scientific test of 95% confidence level if you're in the statistics. In any event, if you look at those environmental numbers, that's a bunch of different ways to measure environmental quality. Hazardous waste generated per capita, toxic emissions per jobs, toxic emissions per capita, a whole bunch of things there. They're all positive, those Pearson R's. That means as the energy intensity rises, all of these things are rising. They're going up, they're higher. In other words, you got higher, this tells you that you should have higher emissions per job, higher total emissions, higher emissions per capita, if you have a high energy intensity. Now, the green conditions and green policies come from the Green Index. The reason they're positive is that as you raise their score, your state is becoming poorer in environmental quality. All right, on energy, it's exactly what you would expect. We're dealing with an energy variable, and all the others go up, all the other ways to measure energy. The interesting one is the one with the negative sign in front of it, which is the price of industrial energy. If you've got a low price for industrial energy, you're going to have a high energy intensity. That's what this is telling you. It turns out Louisiana has the lowest price of 48 states for industrial energy. This price that the citizens are paying, you and I, is 23% above the national average for residential energy. Industry is getting their energy, though, 35% cheaper than the average industrial state. That's a subsidy. Subsidy amounts to about $200 per person per year, or about $1 billion per year for our state. Now, that's money that comes from my pocket. It means you and I pay too much for energy as residents. Industry pays too little relative to the national average. That's what I'm comparing it to. And because they pay so little, they can waste. And they do waste. That's why that energy intensity is so high. That's why our pollution levels are high. That's why it's a strong reason why our economy is in bad shape. Let's look at the socioeconomic indicators. Personal negative signs, remember, it means these things are dropping if your energy intensity is rising. Personal income drops, as does job growth, if you have a high energy intensity. Income disparity rises. I'll come back to that. Poverty rises, unemployment rises. Louisiana is #1 in poverty now, which you may know. We're also #1 in income disparity. That's the gap between the income levels, between the top 20% of incomes and the bottom 20% of incomes. We're the same as Mexico right now, that gap. Now, that's surprising because in developed countries, that number, that income disparity begins to even out. It comes closer together. It doesn't get bigger. It's getting bigger here. One of the reasons is because of the way we use energy. It's not time to go into the connections, but I can get into that later in questions if you like. So all the socioeconomic variables get worse if you got a high energy intensity like we do. Economic development gets worse, not better. I mean, the reason presumably we allow industry to pollute more than most other states do is because we thought it was going to make us better economically. Well, it doesn't. It makes us poorer economically, and we're less attractive to new business, not more attractive. And then competitiveness measures there also. I'm not going to go into those, but put it in some simple words. Got high energy intensity, and ours is 50% above anybody else's. You're going to have poor environmental conditions and policies and high pollution levels. You're going to use more energy, contribute more to global warming, more CO2. You're going to have poor socioeconomic conditions, including high poverty, large disparity index, higher crime rates. Turns out the crime rates relate to this disparity index, the gap in income levels. As that gets bigger, crime goes up. Why? I don't know. We'll leave it to the sociologists to figure out. All I'm telling you is that's what the data says is going to happen. And fourth, you've got poor economic development. And you keep less of the benefits within the state. I call it a leakage factor. Turns out we send about 1/3 of our gross state product to other states. Of the income we get doesn't accrue to people in Louisiana, it accrues to people in other states. That's a leakage. If you keep sending your wealth out, you're going to be poor, and we are. And the more energy you use, the more you send that wealth out of the state. Now let's take a look at pollution. What I'm plotting here is the total toxic emissions by state on the left, and across the bottom, the industrial energy use. That's the 50 states you see there. The fact that that R squared up there is 0.86 tells me that I can explain 86% of the pollution levels looking at the energy levels. Very strong relationship between pollution and energy. So if you're interested in cutting down pollution, you got to get to the energy factors. You've got to cut down the amount of energy. And you're aware that every year Louisiana typically comes up #1. One year we were #2, and that was '89. It was a dry year, and that seems to help us. And ever since then we've been #1, like since '89, although there were some good reductions this past year. We'll see what happens with the '94 data, which hasn't really come out yet. But we're #1 in pollution. Now, I've got another way to look at it. Developed this thing called the emissions to jobs ratio. You take those TRI emissions, you normalize them or divide them by jobs. In the sector that's doing the emitting, that does away with the problem of size across states and allows you to compare across states. And when you do that, you find Louisiana way over on the right. It sort of looks like that energy intensity set of curves, and there's a relationship, obviously. But if you're high in energy, you're going to be high in emissions to jobs. Louisiana is 100 times higher than states like New Jersey, which is similar to us. Well, probably 50 times higher than New Jersey, 60 times. Huge disparity, huge gap in efficiency in which pollution is generated. This shows you the emissions to jobs ratio for the manufacturing sectors. That's what's listed across the bottom. This is emissions per job by those sectors. Chemicals is way over on the right, which tells you that if you've got a lot of chemical industry, as we do, you're going to have high emission levels, high TRI numbers every year. Now that average up there, these are U.S. averages shown, so about 1860, 1859 is what it's showing for chemicals. Keep that number in mind, 1859. It's about 2,000 if you want to round it off. Here's the chemical industry's emissions to jobs ratio for a number of states. These are the big chemical states across the U.S. Look at Louisiana. We're at 14,000. Remember I just told you the U.S. average is about 2,000 or slightly less? In our chemical industry, we emit 14,000 pounds of TRI chemicals per job per year. 7 times the U.S. average, 8 times perhaps. 60 or 80% higher than the next nearest state, which is Alabama, Texas, Florida, and Tennessee. U.S. average is there again, 1859. All the states above the U.S. average are southern states. Now, either pollution likes heat, southern accents, or friendly people, or there's something wrong with the policies in the southern states. I'll let you decide. Now, there's some good news. That 14,000 pounds that I told you about in the Louisiana chemical industry in Louisiana is over here, and it looks like it's a low number. We started at 29,000 pounds back in 1987. It dropped rapidly from 87 or 88 actually to about 1991, 92, and it's kind of leveled off there. I had my own thoughts about why that occurred, but it did occur. And what I find is that same sort of relationship now. This emissions to jobs ratio is relating to a lot of different kinds of factors that you wouldn't expect it to relate to, but it does. So as that emissions to job ratio rises, remember we're the highest here in Louisiana, you find unemployment, poverty, energy use, and income disparity also increase. And actually the emissions to job ratio may be tracking that energy indicator. The energy is more basic, I think, than is the emissions to job ratio. Job growth, retail sales decline, so the economic things are getting worse. Business failures increase. Scores from the Corporation of Enterprise Development get worse. That's a business group. They rate states every year. They use about 70 different economic factors. Louisiana typically is at the bottom of the list. So that old myth about cleaning up your environment is going to be bad for jobs or bad for the economy is the myth. It's wrong. Cleaning up your environment makes you a better economy and better environment, obviously, and helps the energy situation. Well, why does that positive relationship exist? This helps to explain it, I think. What you see in blue there is the economy. And what economists will tell you about is producers, sometimes it's called factories, and then households, which are the consumers. Producers make goods, which they sell to households for a price, so there's a flow of goods and a flow of dollars back the other way. Households provide labor, and for that they get wages, so it's a nice perpetual motion machine. Things go round and round. But we know that perpetual motion can't happen, and the only reason this thing can function in blue, this economy, is because it's embedded in the environment. And the environment provides to it materials, energy, information, aesthetics, if you want to call it that. And we use them for a while, and then we throw them away. So these two critical services, providing resources and accepting waste, is what the environment does for the economy. The economy cannot survive without the environment. The reverse is not true. The environment does very well without the economy. So what this really says, then, is that if your environment's in good shape, it ought to be able to contribute more to the economy. In other words, if your water's clean, your fishing is going to be better. Fishing is an economic thing. If your air is clean, you ought to get more tourists, and so on. There's thousands of such examples you could give. But that's the relationship, and it's a positive relationship. It's the same thing said in words. Now, why did that happen, that dropping of that emissions to jobs ratio that I showed you before, well, here you have a graph of spending by the chemical industry, and that's shown in those open circles. And you read that on the right scale there, where it went up from about 100 million a year to about 650 million a year. This is chemical industry alone. So about a six-fold increase over those years, 87. It actually started to rise about 89. And many would say, if you believe the myth that cleaning up your environment is going to run off jobs, then we should have run off jobs like crazy in Louisiana in those years. In fact, here's what happened with jobs, and that's shown in the black circles. And jobs went up about 3,500 in the chemical industry alone. Turns out it's about 25,000 jobs in manufacturing, and I've got the numbers for all the manufacturing. But they say, they have a multiplier they use. They say if they create one job inside the industry, there's 4.6 created outside in the surrounding economy. Well, you take that multiplier and add it to the direct jobs that were created in the manufacturing sector, and you're talking 125,000 new jobs created in these 4 years because of pollution control spending. So pollution came down, unemployment came down, per capita income rose a little. You can begin to see how some of those things might be connected. Now, one of the reasons we're so high in the U.S. is because our taxes on energy are so low. Energy pricing in the U.S. is ridiculously low, especially for the industrial sector. It's much lower than anywhere else in the world. Here's gasoline taxes as just an example. And if you go to Europe, you're going to pay $3.5, $4 a gallon. Now, nobody wants to pay that, but you either pay it on the front end or you're going to pay it on the back end. We're paying it on the back end, and it's costing us much more than that $4 a gallon to pay it on the back end. Here's the U.S. way at the bottom. We've got the lowest taxes of any industrialized country. Well, turns out Louisiana does the same thing. This is relative energy prices. What I'm showing you here is the price of energy for the residential sector divided by the industrial sector. I told you before that the industries are paying lower than normal, lower than average for industrial energy. You and I are paying more. If you take those two average prices and divide one by the other, Louisiana and Alaska are about 4, meaning I'm paying 4 times for a million BTUs what industry pays, 4 times. The U.S. average is 2, about 2. So in an average state, I would be paying less for energy and the industry would be paying more, and that's what this thing tries to show you. For instance, in New Hampshire, way over on the left, their ratio is 1.07, so industry and citizens are paying about the same amount of energy. You would say, well, New Hampshire must be in horrible shape. Baloney. New Hampshire's got a 3% unemployment rate. They got a pretty high income level. They're doing wonderfully well. In fact, the states that are doing well are on the left side of this curve. So just the ratio of the prices of energy will illustrate the problem. Now, this results in that $200 subsidy I was talking about per person per year, or about $1 billion a year just for energy. And there's other subsidies we give. That's just the energy subsidy. But it also hurts our economy to do it this way. Putting it all together, we're a very large consumer of energy and a large producer of greenhouse gases. Our industrial consumption of energy is enormous. It's excessive due to cheap energy. It means poor energy efficient, higher pollution, poor socioeconomic conditions. You and I are overpaying for energy. The other thing is that we have a poorer business climate. We're less attractive to new businesses. Now, you would say, well, with cheap energy, they ought to be flocking here. They're not. Because energy isn't the only thing they look at. They look at a trained workforce, they look at conditions, socioeconomic conditions, and so on. So we're less attractive. Now, what's the solution? Well, I think it's straightforward. It's going to be politically difficult. We'd have to raise the price to Louisiana's industrial sector and lower the citizens' energy prices. Additional benefits would be improvement in the energy efficiency, and our environmental and social economic conditions would get better, and we'd lower our contribution to the global warming problem, because we are a major contributor. Thank you. I hope it was understandable.
I'm going to talk about least cost energy planning, and along with Tommy Milliner. We're going to divide it up, but as you can see, we have a problem in Louisiana, at least I'm convinced. The amazing thing in looking at those charts is that they didn't just sort of gradually go up to Louisiana. On a number of them, you would see kind of the charts gradually going up, and then Louisiana often would be a huge step up. So we have a big problem here that is related to energy. I don't think I need to expound on that too much more. But the other side of that is that energy efficiency is one of the most powerful tools in our weapons, in our arsenal for environmental protection. And so the connection with least cost planning is that in the utility area, which is where a lot of our energy is used, it is one of the ways, and I'll get into what least cost planning is, but it is a mechanism for getting energy efficiency into the marketplace, which is what we need to do in Louisiana. And of course, CO2 emissions are one of the big byproducts of using of heavy energy use. If we can get energy efficiency into the marketplace that much faster, we're going to reduce global warming gases in Louisiana, along with a number of other benefits. For instance, the job problem that we have, the multiplier effect on dollars spent on energy efficiency is much greater than for building energy-intensive type industries that we have often supported with our low energy costs in Louisiana. So what is least cost energy planning? Well, first of all, let's look at what traditionally utility companies have provided kilowatt hours. They have seen themselves, at least in recent history, as providers of kilowatt hours of energy. And in doing so, they have concerned themselves with how they supply those kilowatt hours. They've seen that as their business more than the business of providing energy as a service. An example of energy as a service is lighting. We don't use kilowatt hours for the sake of using them. We use it for the light it gives us. Or in the case of space conditioning, we're using it for comfort. We're not just using it for its own sake. In recent years, we have made huge advances with energy efficiency as far as technology goes. There have been a number of advances, and one example that is easy to carry around is lighting. This is a compact fluorescent light bulb, and this light bulb it doesn't get hot when it's on, because it's converting the energy that goes into it into light instead of heat. A normal light bulb, an incandescent light bulb, makes heat, and light is a byproduct. With this, there's a little bit of heat, which is a byproduct, but primarily the energy is producing light. This is a 15-watt compact fluorescent light bulb, and it replaces a 60-watt lamp. Now, these have been around for about 10 years now. They're getting a little smaller, a little bit more convenient, but and as you look around the law school, you will see compact fluorescent light bulb lighting, whereas in other buildings at Tulane, you'll see incandescent lights. But the question is, why, after 10 years, do we still have a lot of incandescent lighting? And there are a lot of market barriers. Here is some of the economics of just looking at the light bulb as on an individual basis. From the consumer point of view, the economics are very good. First of all, this lasts 10,000 hours, about 13 times as long as a regular light bulb. So you save on the cost of all the light bulbs that you'd be replacing. In addition, the big savings is not the savings on materials, but it's the saving on energy. When you buy a light bulb at Schwegmann's or wherever, the cost you're paying at the store there is a minuscule part of the overall cost that you'll be paying later on. In fact, when you add the different costs together, we end up with about a 55% savings from using compact fluorescent technology. Now, these kind of advances have also happened in other areas as well. Refrigerators today are over twice as efficient as refrigerators that were being manufactured 10 or 15 years ago. And we can go, and the technology is there to go a lot further. But just looking at the standard ones that are in the market now. Industrial drive power is much more, there is industrial drive power motors that are available that are much more efficient, that have variable speed drives. The advances are basically in every sector. And the point about a light bulb like this is that we can view this as a resource. This is producing, when it's on, it's producing 45 watts of saved energy. The difference between what we would be using with the regular incandescent light bulb is energy that can be used somewhere else. And that energy has a cost. That is, the saved energy has a cost in the same way that there is a cost to generate electricity. We can measure the cost of saving energy, so what we do with least cost energy planning is we think of energy efficiency as a resource, and there are economic values associated with it. Now, this is, I don't know if you can see that. We get just the lower part here. This is a graph showing the potential for electricity savings in the U.S. as a function of marginal cost of conserved energy. You can see there are two lines there. These are two different studies that were done, one by EPRI, which is the research arm of the electrical industry in the United States. The other was done by the Rocky Mountain Institute, which is the lower one. But in either event, what you can see here, going across the chart this way, this is showing the amount of energy used in the United States and what can be saved cost effectively. On the y-axis here is showing the marginal cost of those savings. So, for instance, using the EPRI number, lighting efficiency is available at about somewhere, it looks like about 0.7 or 0.8 cents a kilowatt hour. That's a lot cheaper than the cost of generating power in any power plant that we have, because it's cheaper than the fuel cost alone, not to mention the operating cost and the construction cost. These charts are actually closer together than you might think, because I can explain the differences in a second, but whether you're going with the EPRI numbers, the industry numbers, or Rocky Mountain Institute's numbers, it doesn't really matter, because what they're showing is that we can save between a third or up to two-thirds of energy cost effectively that we're using in the United States. We ought to be going after that. That's the point. Now, you could argue about what the differences are in the numbers. In fact, there was a study done looking at these two numbers, and the differences are just basically explained by the assumptions that in one study in the EPRI curve excludes energy savings that were going to happen anyway. In other words, because of efficiency standards are going in place. If you notice on one of the lighting numbers here, there's actually a negative cost. That's because there are, in addition to the direct energy savings, there are also savings on equipment. That is, you're avoiding the need to replace light bulbs. There's maintenance costs that are, and so one study accounted for that. When you look at the differences, the lines are pretty close together. So there's basically a broad agreement that there's huge potential for energy savings in the United States. Now, in least cost planning, what we do is we treat energy efficiency as a resource, and we allow it to compete with the traditional supply side resources. That is, since we can measure the cost of saving energy, we can compare that to the cost of generating energy in a power plant. If it's cheaper, we ought to be doing it. That's the underlying premise for least cost energy planning. Under traditional utility practices, where utility companies only look at the supply side, seeing themselves only as a provider of kilowatt hours, we didn't really make a distinction between bills and rates. That is, assuming that energy consumption was sort of a matter of fate, that we couldn't really do anything about it, the only thing that was important to look at was the rate of energy, the price per kilowatt hour. So that if you could lower the price per kilowatt hour, you lowered the bill because consumption didn't change. Now, what often happened in that scenario is, especially in Louisiana, to take it to the absurd, by having that perspective, the utility companies would often go out and market energy waste as a way of lowering the price per kilowatt hour. That is to say, a program to promote electric water heating, which is not an efficient way to heat hot water, but utilities would make the argument by having programs that would encourage people to use more energy like that, you would divide the fixed cost of their power plants over more kilowatt hours of sales, and thereby you might lower the price, that is, in this case, the rate for energy, and that would be a justification. Now, in fact, bills are equal to rates times consumption. So you may slightly lower the rate, but by that kind of policy, you will vastly increase the usage. And you're getting the same product. That is, you're heating your hot water to the same temperature in that example. So your bill is going up. But bills, of course, are what we really care about. And from a societal perspective, not just bills, but the overall cost. That is to say, there are direct costs of energy that we see on our bills, but there may also be environmental costs, such as global warming certainly would affect the economy. Cost on health are costs which may not show up on your electric bill, but it's a cost that you may have to pay as a consequence of building a power plant that is creating environmental problems. But let me just give you an example of the problem in terms of bills. Now, this is a chart showing average electrical residential consumption in the United States. Louisiana has this is average. Let's get that up there. The average cost per kilowatt hour in the United States in 1994 for residential energy use was. Can you see that 8.3? It's about 8.3 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, in Louisiana, we're below average in our rate. Nevertheless, we have the third highest bills in the country, and the reason for that is that we have extremely high consumption of electricity in Louisiana. And this is looking at just electricity consumption, and it's an easy way to compare it, but I think Paul has established the high energy consumption that we have, in all of our industries here. But the kind of philosophy that we've had, looking only at kilowatt hours, and the price at rates is what yields this kind of price. It's not because we're a southern state. As you can see, the states that have higher bills than us actually are Arizona and Texas, where Texas has actually lower consumption than we do. The states that have high consumption often are states in the Pacific Northwest, for instance, where electricity costs are very low. And so because their rate is extremely low because they've got hydropower, their high consumption is still not yielding the high bills. So under least cost planning, we want to look at the lowest cost. One perspective is the lowest cost in terms of bills. To take the real objective would probably be the lowest cost to society, and we ought to try in doing least cost planning to include societal costs. Now, speaking of societal costs, I want to go back to the light bulb just to show what one light bulb will do. One energy efficient light bulb over its lifetime can save about a ton of carbon dioxide emissions. That's one light bulb alone. So energy efficiency is a very powerful environmental tool to use for global warming, and moving it into the marketplace is something we want to look at. The economics of it should include some of the environmental benefits as well. And some of the mechanisms that have been put forward on least cost planning do that. But because of the growing certainty of global warming, what that should do is boost the rationale for doing, not just the rationale, but these external costs, these external environmental costs in least cost planning can be included in how we select resources. In other words, if you look at, say, the price of saving energy with the energy efficient light bulb, we ought to include we ought to try to quantify some of the environmental costs in making a selection between whether we go with that type of device or whether we would go with building a power plant. It should widen the gap. Whether you include that or not, energy efficiency, least cost planning, at least puts energy efficiency on a level playing field with supply side resources, and therefore the economics should be good. But as we realize the extent of these environmental costs from global warming, it becomes more imperative. Tommy Milliner is going to talk about the regulatory arena for least cost planning that we have in Louisiana. I just want to show you one aspect of it, which is we do have a least cost planning process in New Orleans, and there are several different levels at which you start out with an energy efficiency measure, like a light bulb, and these are subjected, these energy efficiency opportunities are subjected to a cost effectiveness screen. And after they are looked at as measures, the utility company builds programs out of looking at a number of measures like lighting, air conditioning savings. It can be put into a program where the utility company can go to residential ratepayer or industrial ratepayer and offer these as programs. Now, those programs have to be also screened using, again, the test of showing that they lower overall costs, that is, bills. And finally, the utility company takes a number of programs that it has screened that have passed those tests and integrates them into its overall plan. In other words, puts together a plan for how it's going to meet energy needs, say, over the next 20 years in this case, at the lowest cost. And in doing so, there are opportunities for making a decision over how we value those environmental costs in process that we have in Louisiana, in New Orleans. There is some judgment that can be made over how much we value just the bill savings versus total environmental savings included. let me turn it over to Tommy. I think we're going to take questions at the end.
The previous speakers have talked about the problems that we have in Louisiana. What I'd like to address is the ways by which the citizens here, our citizen groups, can get involved in what's going on in Louisiana before the New Orleans City Council and the Louisiana Public Service Commission. I want to let you know what's happening with them and how that may affect you. Now, I think that you first have to understand that Louisiana is somewhat unique in that most states have one regulatory agency that controls all of the utilities within that state. For certain historic reasons, in Louisiana, it's been divided between the City of New Orleans, the City Council of the City of New Orleans, that is, which regulates the utilities within Orleans Parish, and the Louisiana Public Service Commission, which regulates the utilities outside of Orleans Parish. So, in fact, what we have are two regulatory agencies within the state of Louisiana. And they've gone two separate paths in implementing or not implementing least cost planning within the state of Louisiana. In 1991, the City of New Orleans passed an ordinance mandating that the utility companies within Orleans Parish implement least cost planning. And this is the definition within the City of New Orleans ordinance, which states that least cost planning means a utility resource planning process in which an integrated combination of demand side and supply side resources are selected to satisfy future energy service demands at the least cost of society, balancing the interests of utility customers, utility shareholders, and society at large. Now, this certainly sounds like a reasonable way of going about things. In other words, you look at whether it is more efficient to supply lighting by use of an energy light bulb, or you build a new power plant. But that's not the way things have traditionally been done. The traditional method of regulation is that you only look at one side. You only look at the supply side. Utility company, as demand goes up, the utility company makes a decision as to whether or not to build a new power plant to satisfy that demand. So now, at least within the City of New Orleans, theoretically, you have a process by which the city is telling the utility companies, what you have to do is not just look at supply side, not just look at determining whether we need to build a new power plant, but also look at whether we might be able to satisfy our energy needs by increased efficiency, by replacing inefficient water heaters with more efficient water heaters, by replacing energy refrigerators with more energy efficient refrigerators. The problem is that consumers don't always make a rational choice. Because of the high upfront cost, although it certainly makes economic sense for you or me to purchase a light bulb that saves you 55% over the lifetime of a light bulb, because that light bulb costs $18, people just don't purchase it. They don't understand the long-term economics of it, or they simply don't have the money at one time to make the upfront cost, to purchase a new refrigerator, to purchase a new water heater. So what a least cost planning process does is tell the utility, institute programs by which you can help persons purchase these more efficient appliances, these more efficient light bulbs, by means of rebates. A person may not, you or I may not pay $18 for a light bulb, but we might pay $8 for a light bulb. In which case, the utility company gives a rebate of $10 to a consumer, and then they get a rate, they get that back through their rates. Now, that means that persons who are not participating in these programs are paying for the programs, but it's cheaper than building a new power plant in which everyone would pay for it. So, as I said, in New Orleans, we have a process by which the utility company is mandated and has in fact instituted programs for rebates, for assisting persons to put in insulation in their homes, to take other energy efficient measures. Now, the state of Louisiana, or rather the state of Louisiana outside of Orleans Parish, has not instituted any form of least cost planning, or what we might call demand side management is the term that is used in the utility industry. They've instituted a docket in 1991 to consider whether we should do this on a state level. They haven't done anything. They've been considering it for 4 years, probably near 5 years at this point, and they still haven't come out with a decision. And as a matter of fact, it doesn't seem like they're any closer in 1996 than they were back in 1991. Now, the city council, on the other hand, instituted this program. Rather, they passed the ordinance in 1991. I believe it was in 1993, 1994, they mandated that the programs be instituted. Anyone who lives in Orleans Parish can contact the utility company and NOPSI or LP&L, depending whether you live on the West Bank or East Bank, and participate in these programs. But now the city council, at the request of the utility companies, want to cut back, want to eliminate, want to drop least cost planning. We seem to be going in exactly the opposite direction that we started out in. I think, personally, I think the reason why is because we had this large changeover in the membership of the New Orleans City Council, so that the people who are on the council at this point don't have the institutional memory. They don't have a memory of Grand Gulf and the large struggle that we engaged in to prevent those costs from being implemented upon the consumers, and they don't really have a knowledge, specialty knowledge in these cost planning. So they have a sort of a short-term perspective, and I don't think that they're really considering the long-term goals of what the least cost planning and demand side management can do. Now, on the state level, as I said, the Louisiana Public Service Commission has been considering least cost planning since 1991, and they still haven't decided whether or not to do such least cost planning. But interestingly enough, in 1992, the federal government passed an act which required each state agency to consider least cost planning and decide whether you should do this on a state level. This is separate and apart from the other proceeding that the commission had done on its own. And in light of what Mr. Templet had remarked about the energy inefficiency, I want you to keep that in mind as I read you this quote by the Louisiana Public Service Commission. And so in 1993, the Louisiana Public Service Commission rejected the provisions of the Energy Policy Act, the Federal Energy Policy Act, which said each state commission should consider adopting least cost planning and adopting demand side measurement measures. And the commission stated, adoption of the federal standards will not encourage conservation of energy supplied by electric utilities, optimization of the efficient use of facilities and resources by electric utilities, or equitable rates to electric consumers. Which I think is a pretty astonishing position to take in light of all the evidence we have about what inefficient use of electricity does to the state's economy. Now, as we stated, not only does the not only does energy efficiency make good economic sense, but also has a pollution aspect to it. And one thing I think not many people are aware of is the percentage by which Louisiana uses coal, which is 21% of all electric generating capacity in the state of Louisiana is coal, which is of course, the worst fossil fuel so far as production of global warming gases. I think another interesting aspect of this is how little renewable fuels is in the state of Louisiana, which would be hydro. Actually, people are surprised that Louisiana has any hydro, but there is about 1% of generating capacity is hydro, and about 3%, which is wood waste, which only amounts to about 4% of the state's generating capacity is constitutes what we might consider to be renewable resources. In the materials, I put a lot of information about screening tests and some other technical aspects about least cost planning and demand side management. Because of time, I'm going to pass over that so to leave some opportunity for questions. But what I want to emphasize to you is that I think citizens ought to get involved, both at the state level and at the city council level, in urging their elected representatives to, on the state level, before the Public Service Commission, to adopt least cost planning and adopt demand side management or inefficiency measures. And on the city council level, to encourage people to contact your representatives, your city council members, and tell them, do not dismantle what you've already got in place. You have a good program in place, keep it. And with that, I think,
Yes.
This question is directed primarily to Mr. Templet, but if anyone else would like to address it, I'd appreciate it. I own a 75-year-old home in the city of New Orleans, and my average monthly bill is about $100. What I'd like to know is, with respect to the big picture, how important is it that I try to upgrade that old home? It's fairly upgraded, but maybe there's more than I can do. And secondly, if it is important, how can I get an independent consultant at an affordable rate to let me know what specifically I can do?
I'll give you the brief answer. Yeah, I think you ought to look to improving it. But as for who you can contact, maybe Tom or...
Yeah, we analyze homes. We have a program for doing that. The city, the NOPSI also has a program that we put in place as part of least cost planning. It's called Current Choice. And the number for that is 283-4104. They will come out, they will look at your house, they'll give you a couple of energy efficient light bulbs and give you some options for weatherizing, putting weatherization in your windows, putting in insulation. They will pay for half of your insulation if you have no insulation in your attic. They will pay for half of your weather stripping. Usually it costs anywhere from $30 to $50 or $60 maybe to insulate your windows, but it's a good deal. It's part of the programs that Tommy Milliner was and all the rest of us are wanting to make sure remain.
Is there a maximum income requirement for that particular program? I know some of their programs
Some of the if you're a low income person, you get for free.
Oh, I see.
But you're
Otherwise,
likely not.
Right.
Then you pay half price.
I'd first just like to interject something. We've talked about industry as well as residential, but we haven't really discussed transportation. And unfortunately, internal combustion engines have gotten about as efficient as they're going to get because, again, most of the energy is transformed immediately to heat. And yet we still continue to design our communities such that everyone must own a car. So I think it's incumbent on us as citizens to lobby extremely hard for the transformation of our communities.
Absolutely, and I think that
Agreed.
with electric utilities, which is what we primarily deal with, they give off about 1/3 of the carbon dioxide. Transportation is about another third, and then industries are kind of the final third. roughly. I mean, it varies somewhat. But the Alliance for Affordable Energy is now reconstituting itself in order to do all three sectors: utilities, transportation, and industries. For example, people are talking about another lane across the causeway. Terrible idea. We have to come up with some alternatives. I disagree with you on one point, and that is that the energy efficiency of the automobile has peaked. The energy efficiency of the automobile under what is called the corporate average fuel economy standards went from,
Well, I didn't say the automobile, I said the engine.
oh, the engine.
Get the size of the cars down, obviously we'll be able to use smaller engines and get more efficient with the car, but in terms of internal combustion processes, it's as wasteful as an incandescent bulb. I mean, it's just, from the engineering point of view, I don't think the engine.
Yes, and I think that we may be seeing some options in the relatively near future with fuel cells and others. In fact, we're looking at fuel cell technologies for some buses now in the French Quarter. And one of the points I didn't make here is that I think the state of Louisiana has a golden opportunity to be pushing natural gas as an alternative to oil use. Natural gas has certain advantages, such as much less carbon dioxide per BTU. And so from a fossil fuel of choice, natural gas, which is found here in Louisiana, is good from the environment. We don't want that to be the end-all be-all, but from a transition on fossil, and nobody thinks we're going to go from fossil to renewable from day one to day two. We have to have a transition period, and natural gas is the fossil fuel of choice.
It's clear that reduction of energy use is doubtless the most critical factor in global warming and reducing the effects of that. I wonder if one of you might comment on how big a role carbon absorption sort of actions, technologies, whatever, to reduce the effects of the carbon that's out there. Could you comment on how that plays into the global warming issue?
Probably want to start out with that.
Yeah, and that's kind of the supply side, or demand side, I guess, I suppose, supply side. Here we are supplying CO2, but what's the demand for CO2? Well, trees need it, so reforestation is going to get to be a big thing. It's already begun. There are utilities, for instance, I think one in North Carolina that agreed to buy so many acres of rainforest and keep them there in perpetuity to offset the CO2 that they're going to be generating when they generate electricity. So I look for more of that in the future, and as the U.S. tries to meet its obligations under this treaty that we've signed on global climate change, I think there'll be more and more of that.
I think there's some question as once CO2 is in the upper levels of the atmosphere, that there are some problems with sequestering. I mean, it's not there may be some reasons for doing those kind of programs, but it's not. It's also most important to prevent the release of the CO2 emissions to begin with.
Yeah, you got to hit both sides, and I agree.
Yeah, and also
Conservation is first.
Yes.
In regard to the question on transportation and the concern, and having lived in New Orleans for almost 30 years now, and really appreciating our regional transit authority, or at least at times when it was efficiently run, the taxes, I think, are the key. Gasoline taxes, raise the taxes to a point where the people who live in the suburbs are not going to drive their car. They're going to push for alternative transit. They're going to push for monorail or other efficient use where you're moving people instead of cars. And if you go to Europe, or on any of the countries that have high gasoline taxes, they usually have a pretty good transportation system, an alternative to the automobile, and which is driven by the taxes on the gasoline, which is shifted into providing transit for the people. And I think that's where we need to go, but it's a paradigm problem because nobody wants to give up the automobile. And
Yeah, and it is
Or
something.
pay higher taxes.
Yeah,
Or pay
or
higher
pay
taxes.
higher taxes. It's something that we need to think about very, very closely because, yes, as I said earlier, the technical fix may not be that difficult. It is the political, the cultural fix that is really the big problem. We are psychically tied to the automobile in this country for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is probably $100 billion spent advertising automobiles. Your automobile is a reflection of your being, of your personality in this culture at this point. You take automobiles from people, and you're going to have problems. We have to understand that and try to deal with it. Let me give you a concrete example of that. Everyone knows about the 55 mile per hour speed limit that was in place for a lot of years. I argued for a number of years with top environmental officials in the private sector where I deal with that this was hypocritical because no one drove 55 miles per hour. I didn't drive it, they didn't drive it, everyone knew it. And I said, look, why don't we try to get an increase in the corporate average fuel economy by giving up this 55, which everyone hates anyway, and they consider us hypocrites for even pushing it forward. And yet they were so entrenched in saying, no, we're going to keep 55, and we're going to push for 45 mile per gallon auto fuel efficiency standards. They were killed every year because they gave up nothing in return. And now look what's happened. We've given up the 55 mile per hour. We've gotten no efficiency in return. And everyone in the country is buying 4x4s that get 12 or 13 miles per gallon. It is insane at this point. And it's because the environmentalists refuse to understand that there are psychic, cultural things that are in place here. They thought that they could simply mandate it from the top down. It's not going to work. We need to have these light bulbs and everything that we put forward tested by people so that we can see what the problem with using them is before we try to institute it on this culture in a top-down fashion.
I wanted to kind of take off on that, and also on I think it was the first question about whether, I think you had asked about whether you should do something in your own house, you know, and of course, one person alone is not going to solve the global warming problem, but it is important to, you know, to start with yourself. Also, however, not to end there, but we should take the same attitude as the state of Louisiana. Louisiana alone, although we're a huge CO2 emitter, we are not going to alone, through if we did this action and nobody else did it, we would not solve the CO2 problem. However, we have a tremendous stake in this, since we're, you know, this part of Louisiana at least is below sea level. We're going to feel it first, and so we think it's important to work at the state level. The state needs to make the problem of global warming a problem that is a priority issue to solve. There isn't going to be one solution. Least cost planning is one that we think is ready to go. We need to start looking at what we can do on transportation. We need to make some resolve that this is a problem that we are going to make some difference in, and to show some leadership for the rest of the country and ultimately the rest of the world. In other words, we need to, as a country, we need to make global warming a priority. As a planet, we need to make it a priority. But it's important to kind of get some resolve locally, and that's one of the things we're going to be focusing on over the next few years.
Following up on what Tom said, on the city of New Orleans level, some cities in this country have adopted carbon dioxide reduction programs. They have looked at a comprehensive system of looking at the demand side management, transportation, zoning, building standards, building codes, these sort of things, and they have actually come out with a comprehensive plan for reducing carbon dioxide within that particular city. For instance, Dade County, rather, which has done it on a county basis. I think that that's what we need to do here in New Orleans, is to come out, is to urge the city council and the city administration to adopt a comprehensive carbon dioxide reduction program with achievable, realistic goals for the city of New Orleans, which would touch upon industry, transportation, and residential, and particularly because the city council in this case has a unique ability in that they are also the regulator of public utilities within the city of New Orleans. They have a unique opportunity to mandate a reduction of carbon dioxide.
On that On that point, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is coming to New Orleans in May of this year. They're going to do a number of workshops at our request, at our meaning, I work through the Mayor's Environmental Advisory Council. The mayor has invited them to come down. They're going to be doing workshops for the general public and for the 7 southern parishes. Attend those. You're going to hear a lot about global climate change over the next year or so, because we want to make ourselves the center of activity, and not only nationally, but internationally. So we're going to need your help, your resources, and your ideas. Please join us. Thank you very much.
I'll make a few announcements just as it's lunchtime here.